Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Good evening, a very warm welcome to Smart Sustainability, the first one in 2020. Here we shape the conversation about creating a sustainable future in the digital, or better said, the new human age. I'm thrilled you're with us tonight as we're broadcasting live from Fairfax, a vital part of the Washington, D.C. area. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. 2020 promises to be a big year with lots of hot topics and paradigm shifts ahead that affect how we do business, how we work. Changing the board structures to mirror a more diverse, multi-generational workforce is a hot and necessary conversation many organizations and people are engaging in right now. It is at the heart of inclusive decision-making and reflective of the need to manage complexity and engage different generations to navigate an uncertain future. So, how do organizations balance different backgrounds, experience levels, and relevance on their board of directors? Why are multi-generational boards important? How do they impact business performance? And how do we adapt to a new, more equal decision-making structure that has less to do with years of tenure and more to do with different values? This is what we want to talk about with these guests. Kaycee Childress, Executive Director of Northwest Federal Credit Union Foundation and board member of the Dulles Regional Chamber of Commerce. Warren Wright, author of Second-Wave Millennials, Tapping the Potential of America's Youth. Alex Scott, Chair of the Dulles Chamber's Young Professionals Committee, and Jack Boettger, an advisory board member of Second-Wave. And to all of you, welcome to Smart Sustainability. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we're going to dive right in. This is a very, very exciting topic. Lots to talk about, lots to explore. So I would like to start with Kaycee. So the Dulles Chamber of Commerce is pretty active, I believe, in engaging younger demographics. So I know there are a lot of new programs that try to increase the participation of younger demographics, but also the participation of younger demographics on the board. So why is the Chamber taking a lead in this one?
Well, I think it's important as the workforce expands and we're seeing more, the millennial generation is fully entrenched in the workforce. The generation after that is coming into the workforce and really making their impact. It's important to get those different viewpoints. It's important to get those perspectives, and one of the things that the Chamber is really looking at is corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at that. We see it as a way to engage and keep younger generations involved. It's so important. The Chamber has their committee that they're working on, corporate social responsibility, and I know it's one of the things that as a company, Northwest Federal Credit Union, it's part of our business plan, it's sort of part and parcel. To give you an example, this year I think we had planned 7,500 hours of employee volunteerism. We know that's really important to our employees, just like the Chamber does, and we want to make sure we're engaging those younger employees. Well, those employees blew it out of the water, and it was something like 8,000 hours that they put out there. So I think it's really valuable to look at those different perspectives and look at what those younger generations are bringing into the workforce and what their goals are and what they care about. Mm-hmm.
And the Board of Chamber obviously has recognized this and is engaging in this quite a bit.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to move on to you, Warren, here. So, inclusive decision-making, multi-generational board of directors. Is this an essential element of smart governance? So when I'm looking at, I know you wrote a book about unleashing the potential of America's youth. I actually have it right here, so I might as well hold it to the camera. Why is it important to include America's youth into decision-making at the boardroom level?
Yeah, I think if you think about that globally, in the 1970s, somewhere less than 5% of folks on board of directors were women, and today it's about 40%. And you are also seeing far more people of color serving on boards. So for the same reasons, for the power of that diversity, having younger people on boards actually has advantages. Much like having 40% of women on boards has advantages. You have them have the perspective that you can't get from anywhere else. A perfect example is we know that millennials are the digital generation, digital natives. Their perspectives and perceptions on social media, on AI, on robotics, on the future of work, it kind of where things are going is where they already are. So if you actually have them on the board, you're actually going to be smarter about the decisions that you're making in your organization. And that really is the purpose of the board, is to kind of guide staff into making better decisions for the future. The best way to make better decisions for the future is to have the people that are going to be part of that future as part of your board.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Alex, you chair the Young Professionals program of the Dulles Chamber of Commerce, and I believe you also head the finance committee, or on the finance committee?
I am slowly getting on the finance committee, yes.
Okay. So let me ask you, why did you get engaged?
I'm actually a CPA at a local firm, Thompson Greenspan, who's part of the chamber, and they actually came to me with the offer of, hey, do you want to get on the Young Professionals? And I thought, I want to get more involved. I want to do more. I want to advance my career. So that was, part of the reason I decided to do that. And it's little did I know the first meeting I was going to go to, they were going to say, hey, how would you like to be chair? I just got here. I don't,
So what do the Young Professionals do?
So Young Professionals, basically what we try to do is, give back to the community. Social.
In what way?
We have community events that we do.
Okay.
We also try to do social networking events, professional development events, just to give the younger generation kind of a look into growing their brand and their business and meet other people in the community. So I think that's what we attempt to do, and also we get in with the chamber as well and do events with the chamber, so that the younger generation can see kind of how things can aspire to being on boards and taking those leadership roles as they get older.
How long have you been on the board now?
I've been on the board 2 years for the Young Professionals, and as far as the financial committee, the finance committee, it's been just a couple of months now. So.
Very interesting. I know, Jack, you serve on an advisory board, I believe with Second-Wave. So what is the function of the advisory board?
Yeah, so we are basically a sounding board for Warren. I mean, he's doing some great work with Second-Wave and going into these companies and helping them kind of bridge the generational gap between managers and their employees. And me as a millennial, someone that's 23 years old, a Second-Wave millennial at that, who's pretty new to the workforce, I'm joined by some other great minds, and Warren comes in and bounces ideas off of us, goes through the experience they've had working with the growing number of companies that they are. So coming in and asking us, hey, how would you react to this activity? Getting to know us better, looking really inside the millennial mind. So when he's putting, these practices and training regimens into place at these companies, he knows that it's something he's ran by millennials, and specifically Second-Wave millennials like myself.
So you're kind of like a focus group.
Yes, exactly.
He's kept us out of a a lot of trouble.
Okay,
Yeah, we test,
okay. So
he's the guinea pig. So.
Let me ask you then, how do you feel, what kind of impact do you feel you can make as a millennial on decisions that we're going to the boards or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the best things about serving on the advisory board is, while we only meet ever so often, I feel like I'm an integral part of the team. I'm part of the folks that are working full-time, like Warren, like Deanna, like Michael, like Daniel, and now Sabrina, that are, this is their job. And, for someone like me to only come in ever so often and then, just as I said, bounce ideas off us, get us opinions, I feel like every single time I'm in there, they're really listening to me. And I think that the things that I'm saying are going to be put into place. And, as we follow up up on the work that they've done. I see that they have, and that just instills a lot of confidence in me. So to answer your question, I think that I can have a big impact, and with Warren at the helm, he's shown that you know, my voice is heard and put into action.
So you do see that the ideas are taken forward and that they're implemented?
Oh, 100%.
How large is the advisory board?
So the advisory board is going to be made up of 7 of us.
Okay, that's quite a number. Very
Lucky 7.
Lucky
So,
7. Well,
yeah,
and also if you have to have votes for decision making, I
Right,
guess
right.
you have an odd number. You always get the majority. I was going to get back to the impact that also wanted to ask you, Alex, on how you feel you can impact, or you have impacted, the Chamber's board since you've been on.
So I think one thing that I really tried to do is show a younger generation kind of, I'm a little bit of an older millennial, I'm 34. So I try to show them kind of what it takes to get into these certain roles, and that, you know, you need to network, you need to get out, and you need to talk, you know, to the older generations, and, you know, you need to have drive, you need to have want, and go out and to, you know, really kind of get your hands dirty in these, you know, these organizations, because, you know, you may have good ideas and you may want to put ideas forward, but unless, you know, you go out and, you know, do it, it's, you know, you're gonna kind of sit on the sidelines. You'll see someone else do it. So I think millennials, you know, have a tendency to have good ideas and have want sometimes, and they don't necessarily, you know, push hard enough. You know, certain millennials, and that's not.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think sometimes, you know, I think sometimes millennials have a tendency to, you know, get into a situation where, you know, they think things are going to be easy. They don't have to maybe work as hard. And so I think, you know, I tried to show them that, you know, as long as, you know, you have drive, you know, you put forward the effort every day. No one's perfect. As long as you know, put forward the drive every day, then you know, you'll make it. You'll make it through the organizations, and you'll rise to the top. People like to see hard work, dedication, and, you know, and that's all generations. That doesn't I don't think, you know, hold to one generation or another. So that's kind of the impact that I tried to have. I mean, obviously along with the community side, but I really tried to bring people in and, you know, kind of show them, you know, kind of push them and guide them if they have questions in that direction.
How many board members does the Chamber of Commerce have?
They have about 6, and it's fluctuating a little bit with time. We're in 2020 now, so there's a few changes going on. But we're down to 4 now, but, you know, generally there's 6. There's a social chair. We have community development. We have professional development with the 3 chairs. We had 2 co-chairs. And then we have an individual who's kind of a board member at large.
So Kaycee, for how many years has the board have now a larger participation of a different demographics? Do you know?
I don't have the years specifically,
estimated, just like
but it's been
period.
quite a while. I mean, I know that there is a very definite push on the part of the Dulles Chamber, and on the part of a lot of the companies like mine that are very integral to that chamber, to really make those boards multi-generational. I think it's important to hear what younger generations have to say. I mean, as you alluded to in the past, we used to have very homogenous boards, and now there's a realization that there's so much that different generations, different sexes, different ethnicities bring to the table. And those differing viewpoints, I think a lot of it actually goes back to when you look at Apple and you look at how they started structuring things and how they were starting to talk about design thinking and really bringing those different perspectives into the boardroom, so that then things like corporate social responsibility, those are key touch points with younger generations. And what we found is it's not just about helping the community, it's about engaging your employees, having employees that are happy, having employees that want to come to work every day, having employees who know that your company believes what they do and cares about what they do in the community. And I think without that multi-generational board, it would be harder to get to that. It would be harder to really see what generation's coming up. I mean, I look at my own children, and we just missed millennials. We've got the next 2 generations coming up behind them, and the generations that are coming up are completely entrenched in technology. There are those of us, I remember my children asked me when I got my first cell phone, and I said, I think I was 28, and my son had one at 10. They're completely engaged in technology, and they bring an entirely different and new and vibrant perspective to the boardroom.
When I believe you work a lot with boards as well, right? Can you give us some examples, like first-hand examples of when you actually have seen how multi-generational boards directly impact the decision-making and that it actually leads to a business advantage or a competitive advantage? Because we all say there is a competitive advantage with it because the world's moving so fast, and as you had initially said, that it would be absolutely crazy not to have the generation participate that actually comes from this type of environment. So I would be interested to hear kind of like, are there concrete examples of some decision making, for example, new programs you're aware of or so of organizations that have rolled something out that was a direct result of a multi-generational board?
Yeah, so actually let me give you an example actually of a nonprofit that I was involved with my church. I served on the board of trustees of our church and actually chaired a search committee when we were looking for a minister, a new minister. The old one retired. And the selection committee made the decision, which was a great decision. They wanted people on that search committee from from their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So we had a way widely diverse generation at search committee, and I will tell you that the younger people introducing the technology, just little things like project management, using Google Drive and actually, I mean, it sounds stupid, but actually sharing information online that we wouldn't think about doing in our 50s, right? But it just actually allowed for better communication and better decision making. And then when the ministerial candidates met us, the search committee, they were very impressed with the fact that there weren't a bunch of old, 70, because churches tend to be older typically, and there's 70-year-olds making decisions and so forth. But here was someone in their 20s and 30s, like, wow, this place is really with it, And because you hire a better minister, you actually raise more money for the church. You could actually accomplish more in your mission and get done more in the community and so forth. So it ultimately did have a really positive impact. I will say, in terms of specific products that are developed within the private sector, I will tell you, if you look at some of the top performing Silicon Valley organizations right now, first of all, they're run by people they're started by people that just graduated from Stanford 3 years ago and are 26 years old, right? So the CEO and all the core people on the staff are in their 20s. Now, it's good to have older folks to give that kind of long-term guidance and that wisdom and that experience, but no one's going to understand the new technology but people that are in their 20s and 30s, right? So you're not going to be able to make the decision-making and actually come up with it is the staff's job to come up with the ideas. It's the board's job to fiduciary responsibility and governance and set the direction for the future. And so I don't know why every organization doesn't have a multi-generational board. I think it's the way to go.
So you mentioned, though, Silicon Valley is all technology oriented, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who would probably say right now that that's all technology, and some of them probably are forgetting that in this day and age, really all companies or organizations are technology firms. Right. You cannot go without, and I think this is where the disconnect is. Exactly. Kind of like when you hear, well, all these technology firms in Silicon Valley, but no, it's actually here. It's right here. But a lot of organizations still struggle with that.
I think about banks and FinTech now. If I'm Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase or some of these guys, you know, I better want to be looking at FinTech and all the innovations that are going on, because I'm going to go out of business if I don't.
That's right.
And the people that are using FinTech are the people under 30.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
call them a board member, call them advisor, call them whatever, but get them involved in the product and the decision making in the organization.
Yeah. So Jack, let me ask you something. When you think back, when did you graduate? Let me ask you that.
Yeah, so I graduated in May of 2018.
So 2018, okay. So when you think back to your graduation time, were you thinking about already being an advisory board member?
No, I wasn't. I was more concerned about getting to work and kind of what was next. I think that, you know, college does a great job of providing you with a lot of structure. You know
Yes.
what's next. You've got another year to wrap everything up. So after I graduated and you know, got my first job, I was a lot more worried about going in and working than actually you know, this role that I have now.
So did it all make sense? Did you reach out to him?
So one little secret about the quality of our board is that we know their mothers and fathers. And so we've known them for a long time.
Okay, so you may have an advantage over other people. Yeah.
That's right, that's how we recruit. So, so yeah, I mean, Jack was a no-brainer. I mean, he's a brilliant kid. Look at him. I mean, come on. So, so we're really.
So you were approached with that. What was your first reaction?
I mean, I was all in. I think that something that Warren illustrates well in the book, and that I can agree with, is as millennials we have opinions. So given the opportunity to get mine out there, as well as the fact that, I think to your point, I was so fresh out of school. I think it was in October of 2018 that I joined, that I had so many things rushing around my head, so many concerns, you know, things that I wanted to kind of get out there. So this being a forum for me to, you know, come in and be able to speak to, hey, you know, I just started working. Here's some of the difficulties that I'm having, and, you know, here's what I think can be done differently. You know, just having that medium was a great opportunity, and I jumped all over it.
I want to give our viewers for a second here a little bit of a catch-up in terms of, we talk about multi-generational because all of us here are kind of like in the midst of it all the time. So with all the demographic changes that are going on, I'm going to ask you that, Warren, since you wrote the book about this. Why is it so important to reach out to other generations and bring them in? Like, can you give us kind of like an overview for our viewers in terms of the demographic changes and why it is so critical? Because I really think even at this point, while everyone's talking about this, I don't think that there really is a big understanding yet, like a large, you know, by mainstream in terms of seeing like, why do we actually need to do this?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, okay, so demographically what's happening in the United States and actually around the world is the millennials, I think, total right now about 100 million. There's 100 million millennials born between, I guess, officially 1982 and 2004. You could say Gen Z is part of that, but we talk about that in the book. We kind of bundle. The definition of a generation is about 20 years of the length of a phase of life. So that's 100 million. That is much larger than the baby boomers ever were, larger than Generation X, larger than the greatest generation and everyone else that comes along. Anytime you have a population that is that large, that population is going to be really influential in everything. Politics, society, media, parenting, you know, everything. So society tends to conform to the largest generation that is coming along. So when you think about back in the 60s and 70s, right? You think about Woodstock in the late 60s. That was the baby boomers, right? The baby boomers made, I think you'll all agree, a pretty big footprint on our culture in the United States. The music and the way we talk and the way we, you know, so boomer, 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 right? So, by the way, they were the original me generation, officially. So that wasn't the millennials, that was the boomers. So every generation kind of comes along and changes things, but we typically don't know, we don't really pay attention because they're young. We don't, you know, we don't think much of young people, do we, right? I mean, there tends to be a bias towards young people usually. And so it's a great time to look at the power of generations and the trajectory that younger generations have on our society and spend time thinking about, like, okay, so if we know where the millennials go, so goes the nation. Why don't we really get in their heads and figure out what they're thinking about? And quite frankly, they're thinking about some cool stuff, like purpose over paycheck, like sustainability, right? Like all of these things that we know the world needs. The millennials know that too, right? And they're pretty vocal about it and pretty intense about it. So I think from a value standpoint, they have a lot to add to the conversation and to the decision making right now. And by the way, I think they're fine with being asked and participating in stuff. They like being in community and making decisions more broadly, right? This isn't the cowboy, this is the posse for millennials, right? They like doing things together as a community. So, and by the way, they get along with their parents too. It's the first time.
Sometimes. Thanks for backing me up.
Compared to boomers, not even close. You had the I hate the parent generation to the parents are okay generation.
Yeah.
So that's changed too, and it's important to take advantage of that, really.
Yeah.
But I think to Warren's point too, I mean, millennials, we kind of paint them with a broad stroke, but I think there are also, you have different ages, obviously in the millennial group, and it's a big generation. But you see in businesses these days, different benefits that are coming out to cater to some of these millennials that, maybe, the almighty dollar was the first thing that people would look for. Well, how can I get, that step up, money-wise? Now it's, how do I get more time off? So there's definitely that shift that we see, with the millennial group, and it's hard, even for me being an older millennial, to even sometimes understand that mindset, because I'm, how do I provide, which I think was a little bit of the older generation versus,
That's actually the Gen
Xers.
Gen X is
really about how do we provide for our family.
That's exactly it.
And if you look at life experience, we're also the sandwich generation. We're the generation that's providing for our parents now and providing for our children.
That's right.
So it's a very different mindset, and that's what I was talking about when you talk about, at Northwest, when we're looking at how we're going to attract really good, high-quality employees, what we find is they want to know that we care about what they care about. They don't want to just see the paycheck. They want to see what we're doing in the community. They want to see how we're making the world a better place. And I think companies are seeing that more and more. You and I were talking, and I was saying in 2010, only 20% of companies had some sort of program out there with respect to corporate social responsibility. By 2017, it was 86% of the S&P 500 that had a report out there about their corporate social responsibility. And I think that's a direct reflection on millennials coming up and what's important to them, and them saying, I'm not going to turn down the money, but this is what I care about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was going to ask another question about bias, but we are getting ready to head into the break. So when we come back, we pick up right where we leave off, talking more about inclusive decision making, what it takes, and who's participating when we come back.
Imagine a time when no one person has Parkinson's disease, is debilitated by a stroke, and no family suffers the tragedy of Alzheimer's. Some of the best minds in America are doing more than imagining. The American Brain Foundation is seeking to find cures, where life without brain disease isn't just something we can imagine, it's something we can know. Help us get there.
Here we are, 2013. We all depend on technology to communicate, to bank, and none of us know how to read and write code.
The first program I wrote asked things like, what's your favorite color? Or how old are you?
I wrote a program to play tic-tac-toe.
I first learned how to make a green circle and a red square appear on the screen.
You're just trying to make something, trying to transfer something from your mind to the computer or to a tablet. It's an experience.
The whole limit in the system is just that there just aren't enough people who are trained and have these skills today.
The programmers of tomorrow are the wizards of the future. You're going to look like you have magic powers compared to everybody else.
Great coders are today's rock stars. That's it.
You can't text and pay attention to the world around you, and you definitely can't text and drive. Every year, deaths due to distracted and negligent driving are increasing. In fact, while drunk driving rates have dropped greatly, negligent driving fatalities have skyrocketed. Find out more at negligentdriving.com.
Where we have conversations about shaping a sustainable future in the digital, or, as I said before, better, new human age. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. Tonight we're talking about multi-generational board of directors, why we need them, and how this impacts not only the future of business, but how we make decisions overall. At a time when tenure becomes less important than values and different perspectives, some people may find it unsettling, others easy to adjust, and yet others an absolute necessity to doing business in the years to come. So this is what we're talking about in this round of guests here in the studio. And I would like to go right back in. We spoke about the demographic changes before, laid out kind of the land a little bit as to why it's necessary. And I will say it really is sometimes still mind-boggling that there are still so many organizations that have such an utter resistance to saying this is really what we need to do. So in this next half, I'd like to talk a little bit about where this resistance is coming from, what are good ways of breaking that down, and then talk about coming back yet sort of full circle in terms of what's the purpose of a multi-generational board and why is it so important for younger demographics. So that's kind of the lead-in, but I want to start first out. I know, so on the private sector, I think organizations are looking already more into having multi-generational boards. I know in the public space, there have been discussions going on in changing structures of their boards of directors and having more diversity on the board. Of course, in the public space, it takes a little longer. There have to be ballots that have to ask for it, etc. But let's talk a little bit about resistance. Like, why is there generally still, at this day and age, we're talking 2020, still such a heavy resistance towards changing the board structure? Kaycee, I'm going to give it to you on this one here.
You know, I think part of it is that mentality, well, we've always done it this way. And if you look at society through most of the 20th century, it was a male-dominated, older-dominated, you know, white male hierarchy. Mm-hmm. It just was. And you saw coming out of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, you were getting a little bit more diversity. You were getting women's rights really in the workplace, and there became this push for other groups to be included. And I think one thing that's so unique about this generation is, as you said, you go to Silicon Valley and you have CEOs who are 26, 27 years old, and a lot of them. And this is a large generation. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, it's not just, wait a minute, all of these other people who weren't represented on the boards are saying, hey, we need to be heard too, but you have economic statistics showing these people have a lot to offer. And you see how their companies are doing so well, how they're changing the face of technology on a daily basis. And I really do think that it's just, there is that resistance of, you know, we've always done it this way, mm-hmm. and not wanting to see that. But I think most companies are now starting to get on board and saying, we need to look at this. I think that resistance is being chipped away at, not unlike we chipped away at the Berlin Wall back in the day.
Cool. So coming back to that point, like we've always done it this way, does this come mainly, do you think this comes mainly from complacency, or does this come mainly from being very risk averse?
I wouldn't say it's complacency. I would say that there's a tendency, once you're established, to do what has worked because you know it works.
But we know today it no longer works if you keep it going like this. I mean, there are plenty of examples
right.
that show that the way things were done doesn't work. Even management, the way it was done, no longer
right.
works, right?
Well, and I think there are still some of that holdout, and you can probably speak to that. I think there are still some holdouts that are saying, well, we've always done it this way. Mm-hmm. And let's be honest, when you have that power, who wants to give that up? But the reality is we have these generations that are changing the face of the world, and we have these other groups that their voices need to be heard. And so I think it is being chipped away at. I think if you look at the S&P 500 and you look at how those companies are really changing the way they're doing business, trying to attract millennials, trying to appeal to millennials, trying to make sure that the products they're putting out there are products that millennials approve of and want to use. And you see how Gen Xers are, in a lot of cases, trying to catch up to that technology. I mean, technology is changing like that.
Yes.
And if you're out of the workforce for a year,
you're out.
You come back and you just kind of go, oh man, what all did I miss? It's huge.
Yes.
So I do think that resistance, I don't think it's complacency. I think it's more maybe not seeing the forest for the trees. I think they see this huge generation and maybe it's a little intimidating.
Yeah, oh, you're looking at me. So
Yes.
I have some thoughts.
Yes.
So a couple of years ago, our company did some research, and we wanted to get some national sample research, and we want to get an idea of how generations perceive other generations. And so one of the data points we found that twice as many Xers and Boomers think unfavorably of millennials than favorably. So it's literally like 66 to 33% type of thing, right? So there's a great kind of older generations looking down on the younger generation. Now it turns out, if you go back to research 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, since the beginning of time, older generations have always looked down on younger generations, right? There's never been anything different, right? When the boomers were young, right? For any boomers in the room, you boomers were young, your parents did not think much of you. When the Xers were young, the same thing with the parents. So I think there's a what I would call an implicit bias, and we're learning a lot more about implicit bias right now. There is an implicit bias towards youth as it relates to them making, especially like at a board level, making governance and structural decision making and future oriented decision making. That's a major kind of social change to bring in a bunch of young people into a board. It's scary. Right?
It is scary.
It's weird, it's different, it's scary, they talk different, they act different. But that's the whole point, right? They act different, they talk different, they think different. And that's what you want, actually, in a board, is to have that level of diversity so you could kind of get out of your comfort zone. Because the best organizations today are the ones that get out of their comfort zone, that are not sitting there with the same old, same old, same old. Those are the ones that are going to be successful.
But I feel like other than bias, I think trust is a big word. I mean, a lot of times it takes years to earn the trust of someone who's older than you, that's going to give you that position, that's going to move you up. And so I think for millennials, they have to earn the trust of the older generation before they can, kind of take the reins. And I think that's, we talk about bias, but I think that's really, kind of one of the big key parts of all of it.
So when you joined the chamber, for example, on the board, what was, if you remember back, what were your first 6 months like as a board member? Were you intimidated?
Well, luckily for me, because of the board members are all made up of younger individuals, it's a little bit easier to kind of move in and try to start moving pieces. It's a little bit intimidating when John Boylan, who's our president of the chamber, comes in and starts kind of saying this is how I see it, this is how kind of things maybe should be done or might be better done, things like that. But it's a little bit easier when I guess the board is all on one level, which I guess there's that bias, right? The board is entirely millennial, so we all kind of think roughly the same. Now, if it were the young professionals and we had several chamber members on the board that had a different thought, we might get more done, also because we have different, different viewpoints. But it would also be a little more difficult, I think, at first. that makes sense.
So do you have sometimes like direct dialogues that are going on with chamber members, for example, that kind of bring this up, and you have direct, confrontation or direct dialogue between the millennials and between the boomers, for example?
So, I don't see on the Dulles Chamber Board, I see a very diverse board that works very well together. And I'm not being a millennial, I can't say how I would have felt to walk into it. I mean, I think anytime you walk into a new board situation, and the Dulles Chamber Board is fairly large. So I think anytime you walk into that situation and you've got John Boylan sitting there and you've got everybody else sitting at the table, it's a little intimidating. I don't care what generation you're in. But from what I've seen, it's really nice to sit down at a table, and we've got people on the board that are in their 70s. We've got people on the board that are in their 20s. And it's nice to sit down and have that free flow of ideas, and I think it's really helping the chamber go in a very positive direction moving into 2020. I see where the chamber is going and what they're offering to business, and I see the businesses that they're attracting, and it's definitely propelling the chamber in a positive direction because they have all of that those different viewpoints.
Now DC, or the DC area, might be a little different because we have a lot of technology firms. We have actually a good mix of organizations and companies out here. So maybe DC is even, or the DC area is even a little bit further ahead than maybe other areas in the country where you do not have quite such a diverse structure of organizations or companies where you would say, yeah, well, we need all these younger people. That's where your talent is. This is where the education is. This is where everything is being developed, etc. So probably in some other areas, I can see that there are there could be some challenges. Coming back to my previous question, like, I know you're on the advisory board, so when you're asked for your opinion, are you intimidated or you just say it?
I mean, on that advisory board with Warren, Deanna, and Michael at the table, I have to say that I have never been intimidated.
Yeah, but that's because you knew him probably, growing up.
No, we didn't. I didn't know him growing up.
Okay.
No, he's not intimidated easily. Look at him. Come on.
Yeah, that's right.
He could call his own.
I think that something I went back to before, I mean, I just feel like I'm being heard. Like I've gotten lunch with Warren outside of these meetings multiple times, and every time we're speaking one-on-one, I feel like he is listening to me, and not only listening to me, but sympathizing with me at my level, and that's just amplified when we're at these meetings, and when they're asking for our opinion and going to the board, not just myself. And I think that everybody in that room, we're very different. We all have different jobs, different experiences growing up. At the end of the day, we're all second-wave millennials, and I think that everyone feels extremely comfortable bringing their opinions to the table, and intimidation really doesn't even come into play.
So can you give us a concrete example of when what the advisory board came up was completely contrary to what, like second wave, what the initial theory of something was?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you remember this. Maybe you do, but we try things out on them. Okay.
Yes.
So we did that assessment. What's my personality style? I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. They hated it. So that didn't work really well.
Oh, that's interesting. So why did you hate it?
Well, I don't know. Maybe. Do you remember that? It was like that. It was at Michael and Deanna's house, right? We're adding up the points, and it was like meh.
Right, yeah.
Why did you hate it? Because you don't want to talk about personality?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, what comes into play is it's very hard to answer multiple choice or numerically questions that are pretty deep. Like, how do you view the world? What is genuinely important to you? And how the game worked was, once you would answer one of these questions, you would have a certain amount of points, like, strongly agree would be like a 5, and then, all the way down to a 1 where strongly disagree. So I think at the end, while it gave us a good, it laid out where you may stand on the broader scale as to what's important to you, both in the workplace and outside. It was hard to differentiate. We had very similar numbers. So, I think that it was hard for us to put a numerical value on, an exercise that was really looking to go a bit deeper into what's important to you, what do you value, both in work and outside of it.
And I think that's really a key millennial characteristic. What is really important to you at work but outside of it? I think that's something that, Gen X, again, was so about, got to support the family, got to be responsible, got to make the money, got to do this with my career, got to go to the next step. You're not hearing that from millennials. What you're hearing from millennials is, I want you to ask me what I care about.
Yeah.
I want you to ask me what's important to me. I want you to tell me how you're going to change the world and make it better. I want you to tell me how I can do that with you. I want to tell you how you're going to help my community. Those are the things that are driving them, and I think that that's a huge paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
And you know, companies have to shift to that. They have to shift to that for their customers. As millennials become their bigger customer base, they have to shift to that for employees as they're looking to get really good employees, maintain really good employees. They have to look at that in terms of their business sustainability. And really, who better to ask about that than millennials themselves? You know, what's important to you? I know we just did, for example, it was big news. We just did, I think it was $10 million to the Children's Science Center. And one of the things that is important to employees at Northwest Federal is giving back to the community. And they came back and said, all right, we want to give back to the community in a big way. They didn't say, oh, we're going to sponsor a sports team. They didn't say, oh, we're going to do something that's, you know, more of a national level. They wanted to do something in the community that was going to affect millennials, that was going to affect the entire community, that people were going to be able to go to for the next 100 years. And I think that a lot of that goes back to companies are really focusing now on what is important to my employees, what is important to my customers, and how can I be relevant to them.
You know, in the 1990s, if you look at the top 10 employers according to college graduates, in 1990, 100% of them were private sector. In 2005, 7 were private sector and 3 were either nonprofit or government agency. You know what it was 2 years ago? 8 out of 10 were nonprofit or government agency. So it's like, all right, so if companies aren't, so if you are a for-profit company, awesome. I'm a for-profit company, cool. Just make sure that you're doing something that actually has some element of a mission to it that they could get behind.
Absolutely.
And actually commit to the community, right?
Yeah, and I think this is really the key to most of the changes, as you said, like of the paradigm shift, because with the new technologies, the digitization, we're not only changing how we work and what we do, but most people also start asking why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What's the purpose? Why am I getting to work every day? Why am I standing in traffic? You got to give them a really, really good reason as to why they do this. And the value changes are right at the middle of it. So it's really, the question then would really be like, what do those organizations out, or who can actually afford not to have a multi-generational board? So I was going to ask you a question, Kaycee, because I know you focus a lot on community activities. I believe you head the CSR, the Corporate Social Responsibility
I'm on the Corporate
Committee.
Social Responsibility Committee.
And
I run a nonprofit.
Oh, well, that's right.
So, I mean, we're all about giving back to the community.
That's right. But here's the thing. So with purpose being the strong business driver, so to speak, and we know for talent attraction, that is, you know, one of the top priorities for talent to even come, because they want to resonate with why you do what you do. But automatically, wouldn't that imply that for most people it would kind of be logical that the boards shift to reflect that demographic as a result of this? I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of companies have corporate social responsibility right now. Is there a number that kind of correlates, that says, with all the percentages of organizations that focus on CSR, for example, do they equally shift the structure of their boards?
I think the shift is fluid. I think it's happening. I think it's building up steam. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. I mean, there is that resistance that we talked about earlier. And, you know, there are boards that have, to their credit, have seen, all right, we need corporate social responsibility. It needs to be part and parcel of our business plan. They're committed to it, et cetera, and they may not necessarily have multi-generational boards. But I think what we're seeing as we move forward is there is more of a push to have multi-generational boards. There is more of a push to have more women on boards. There is more of a push to have people of color on boards, to get that diversity and to really be able to deep dive, okay, what is it people really want? Why would you sit around with a bunch of people who are all the same age, the same demographic, and try and figure out what this whole other demographic needs when you can just ask them?
Have them be part of the decision-making process, even better, right?
Right, have them be there, sitting at the board, saying, hello, that's not what I want, I want something else.
But I think there's a difference between asking them what they want and have them part of the decision-making process.
Totally.
And I think this is where people are kind of still hung up and stuck. I think that's the gray area. So let's talk a little bit about the big elephants in the room. What are those? So obviously, you know, they have to, if you take on a multi-generational board, very often you have long-tenured board members, so you have to balance somewhat a different experience level and relevance of what needs to be developed right now. Are there any strategies that any of you know of that can be deployed on this one?
I think if you put Alex on any board, he'll be great. They should try that out. Honestly, Alex, you straddle Xers and millennials in a lot of ways. I think they call it Zennials. And a lot of times they could, you know, a boomer and Xer could kind of swallow the way your values and the way you think about things and so forth are probably more aligned with older than younger millennials in a way. So you could kind of toe step it in with the older millennials first type of thing.
And at the same time, you know, I have the technological know-how and understand
you got all that.
You know, that the second half of the generation, the second wave, as you guys call it, you know, it's difficult. I think there's got to be, you know, bigger companies have not only the kind of wherewithal and the money and the things to be able to you know, get these, have these multi-generational boards and put in these corporate responsibility programs. You know, some smaller companies don't really have that ability, and some of them, you know, you talk about, you know, we're just trying to get more women in managerial roles at you know, companies at smaller levels, much less generational boards. So I think, you know, we do have a long way to go, and I think, you know, if you're in a situation where you're part of a bigger company, I think you have more of an advantage there. You know, my firm is a relatively small firm. We have 60 employees, so it's, you know, you're just not going to see that even if there were for profit. And it's going to take years and years and years before that really kind of flips. But I think, you know, more people are keying into it, and it really depends on the industry as well. I mean, we talked about the tech industry, but you got like the accounting and finance industries, which may be a little more stodgy and slow to change.
Yeah, but they actually, as Warren said, with FinTech and blockchain and everything coming out, they got to get up in the game too.
They have to be on their game. I think there's one thing that's really interesting, and I heard it at a Women in Boards conference, and somebody said the difference between what we were doing years ago with boards and what we're doing now is the difference between inviting somebody to the dance and asking them to dance.
That's interesting.
And that really resonated with me. Because there was a while there where, like it or not, you might be asked to be on the board because you were a woman or because you were a person of color or because you were from a different generation, because they were trying to fill a slot.
Yes.
And I think what we're starting to see now is people are being asked to dance. People are being brought in because their opinions are valued, because they see how important it is to hear what they have to say and really question them. And that's why I say, you know, get their opinions, because they're not just put on the board to say, oh, well, we have a multi-generational board, we have millennials on our board, there you go, box check to move on. It's really because they're looking for that insight.
Yeah, you know, along those lines, Nicolette, I was thinking about, so every generation kind of learns in a different way, and I think boomers and Xers tend to be very experientially based. I'll just figure it out as I go along. Millennials and Gen Z are known as the syllabus generation, and so to the extent you could have learning about being on the board in a more formal, structured way, that could really benefit millennials. In other words, they don't want to fail. Millennials hate to fail, right? So don't throw them out there
But
and just say,
failing
go
is part
for
of
it in
the
the board
culture
meeting.
to learn, and you know, and in agile organizations, failure is a big part.
No. And failure is awesome. Yay, failure. Okay, but not really all the time, and not too much, right? So, so you do want to create like learning environments to make to allow them to understand how to be really successful. Like the opposite of success is failure. Failure is successful. Let's figure out. Let's get learning opportunities, whether it's online or through YouTube or whatever it is, or sit down with board members. But create a formal structure around here's how you could be successful on a board. Otherwise, I think you're going to get a situation where you're just checking a box, right? If all you're doing is just putting them on to check a box, that's not going to be enough. You have to prepare them to be on that board.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that actually brings me up to a topic that I wanted to talk before we go in. We don't have much time, but that really makes onboarding of new board members a really key part to make them successful and to kind of bring them on board and train them. How did the chamber handle that?
I'm fairly new to the chamber, so I can't speak really to what they've done other than they've given me a whole lot of stuff to read, and they've been very great when I've called them and said, hey, what about X or Y? And that's been my personal experience. I can't really speak to anybody else's, but they've been fantastic about that. I can tell you that as somebody who answers to a board, you know, board education is extremely important. Making sure that your board understands and is involved at the appropriate level and doing what they need to do and understanding and making sure that you're conveying that to them is extremely important. I'm extremely blessed to have a fantastic board. I've been in nonprofits since 1992, and I've had some boards that would make you cry.
Yep, it happens.
Raise your hand if you've been there. But no, I think board education is extremely important, and it's one of those things that in the past was overlooked. And I think you're seeing organizations like ASAE coming out and spending a whole lot of time, at least in the nonprofit sector, on how to educate your board, how to train your board, how to work with your board, because people are seeing the need for that now.
Yeah, I think in the onboarding process, there's definitely room for development in terms of learning that. So it sounds to me that for most boards, I believe now that there's more of a clearer purpose. It sounds like if you're being asked to dance, so organizations have to kind of go out and handpick and really go for a very targeted profile in terms of who they look for. On the contrary, is there something where millennials kind of can apply and say, yes, I'm interested, I really want to participate? We have to be quick because we're almost at the end of the show.
You know, just be visible about the fact that you are interested in this idea of a multi-generational board. Just make it visible and communicate it, and they will come.
Yep. And tell millennials to throw their hat in the ring.
Yeah, just tell them to do it.
Yeah, and tell them, I guess, you're open about it. That's great. And this is it already for tonight. I hope you got some insights and really got some ideas in moving forward with a multi-generational board. We'll see you next week.